Okay, let me start again. Welcome to our monthly knowledge sharing session. That is ODR Africa knowledge sharing session. This was scheduled for last month because we usually do this around the last Thursday of every month. But unfortunately, our speaker was held up longer than she expected in a place that experienced natural disaster. We thank God that she's here with us in one piece. And we will be willing to just make it short and move on. In case you are joining us for the first time, ODR Africa Network is an academic, non-for-profit social platforms. Our main interest is to promote communication and information technology to assist dispute resolution processes that provide alternatives to litigation in court. That's basically what we do. Now, we, as I said, are an academic, non-for-profit social platform for the alternative dispute resolution and online dispute resolution community. And what we do is to share news, share information on events, trainings, educate ourselves, so to hone the skills of dispute resolvers. And of course, in honing their skills, we have to learn about the terrain and what goes on and how we can cope. So it was just right that we talk about ODR trust and e-commerce in Africa. And who better can we rely on to do this for us than our speaker today, Robin Cupido. Let me just tell you a little about her. She's a lecturer in the Department of Private Law, University of Cape Town. She obtained BA, LLB, and LLM from Stellenbosch University, South Africa. She currently works as a lecturer in the Department of Private Law at the University of Cape Town, where she teaches law of contract, law of session, and advanced contract law. She's a member of the Research Center for Private International Law in Emerging Economies and has contributed to the commentary on the Hague Principles on International Commercial Contracts, writing the commentary on Mauritian law. Robin's interest in ODR stems from her private international law research. She has recently submitted her PhD thesis entitled "The Feasibility of Online Dispute Resolution as a Distinct Method of Dispute Resolution in Africa" at the University of Cape Town, and is interested in exploring the future development of ODR on the continent. So here is one of us that understands the e-commerce terrain and trust. So let's hear from her. Thank you for joining us, Robin. And well, please be prepared to be called back again, because this is quite an interesting topic. Thank you. Now, we hope that you leave about, you can finish within 10 minutes, or maybe like to give us about 10 minutes to be able to ask you questions, and in case there are some things we need clarification for. But those that we cannot deal with, we'll have to send to you by email, and hope that you Oh,
Okay.
I'm not visible any longer. Sorry. Ah, thank God. Thank God. All right. So, Robin, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I was a little bit surprised to get it, but I'm happy that I can come and chat to all of you today. I'm excited to participate in the knowledge generation that ODR Africa Network is doing, and I hope that I can continue to work with all of you. It would be great for my own personal study, and yeah, to hear from other colleagues in Africa about ODR in their particular countries. My presentation today is going to be very informal, firstly, and going to be more just of a high level, me sharing some thoughts and some observations about the relationship between e-commerce, online dispute resolution, and consumer trust that I first made in the course of my PhD study. As such, some of them are open-ended questions and are going to be quite good for discussion, and I hope to get your feedback. I think this is an area where it's hard to have all the answers, but hopefully after today's discussion, we can find a place to start, at least know where to start asking the difficult questions. So I also want to make it clear from the beginning that my position is as a South African legal academic. And so I'm just talking from basically the South African perspective and the trends that I have noticed in South African society and amongst other African countries at large that have interested me greatly when it comes to e-commerce and the law in Africa. So my talk is going to begin with an overview of e-commerce in Africa, considering briefly user trends, successes, and failures in the broader sense. I will then consider the importance of consumer trust for furthering and promoting e-commerce, and investigate how ODR in its various forms can be used as a tool to create consumer trust in e-commerce. Then I will briefly assess the specific dispute resolution processes that are used by our most successful African e-commerce sites, and highlight ways in which these processes could be improved, if indeed such improvement is needed. And if I have time, then I'll consider how ODR can find application in the future, and how these e-commerce retailers can incorporate perhaps new ways of thinking about consumer dispute resolution. So when we discuss the importance of e-commerce in Africa, we must first consider what e-commerce means in our context. I have adopted the European Community's definition of e-commerce because it is very broad, and I think it speaks to what is currently happening in our African setup as well. So the European Community defines e-commerce as doing business electronically, and that's a very broad understanding of the word business. This includes the processing and transmission of data, including text, including sound, including video. It encompasses many diverse activities, including electronic trading of goods and services, online delivery of digital content, electronic fund transfer, online auctions, electronic share trading for carriage of goods, electronic bills of lading, public procurement even, direct consumer marketing, and any kind of after-sales service. All of these types of activities fall under the broad umbrella of e-commerce. So because it is inclusive of various types of transactions, one can imagine that these types of transactions will all give rise to different kinds of disputes. And so the question is there a dispute resolution process that could be adaptable to any of these kinds of interactions that we class under e-commerce? As the internet and online offerings have become more sophisticated, e-commerce has obviously grown. One reason for this is the increased possibility for interaction outside of physical borders, and e-commerce has become a main contributor to the international economy. It has thus become important for countries to be involved in e-commerce for their sustained economic development, as e-commerce creates access to new markets and stimulates the influx of income from other countries. And I'm going to keep coming back to this point of economic development because in Africa at the moment, we are moving towards this as a big push. How do we promote economic development? Is there this free movement in the African area? And I'll keep coming back to this. Unfortunately, historically, African countries have not been big players in e-commerce due to various social, economic, technological, regulatory, and political factors. Over the past decade, this has changed rapidly and continues to change rapidly, with Africa being hailed as an exciting digital growth market, despite being in the relatively early stages of e-commerce development. Two main factors are constantly identified for this rapid growth. And that is first, that Africa has the youngest population in the world, as well as the second largest population. And so there's a very big potential digital audience. Think of all the young people you know, be they kids, be they siblings. Everyone is connected to the internet somehow. Social media has been huge. And so a younger population tends to be a more online population. And that's a strength that Africa has for e-commerce going forward. Another way that Africa is strong as a ground for growth of e-commerce as a whole is the fact that internet access occurs mostly by mobile penetration. So internet penetration goes through mobile devices, allowing for it to be more accessible to people in developing countries than a fixed mode of internet access would be. So shifting away from this idea that you could only have the internet at an office or on a fixed computer or on a laptop or on a tablet, people have phones. My 88-year-old grandmother who lives in a township has a phone and can access apps and is part of e-commerce in a way that perhaps she wouldn't have been before. And so this mobile technology, coupled with the youth of the population, creates a fertile ground for e-commerce to flourish. As such, when we speak of e-commerce in Africa, we are largely speaking of m-commerce or mobile commerce, as the region is significantly mobile driven. As of 2023, let me check my numbers, there's an 83% penetration of mobile users across the continent. It is also reported that 75% of Africa's online traffic occurs through these mobile phones and mobile networks. So now we have the technology, we have the potential, we have the client base, so to speak. We also have massive potential then for many disputes to arise in this environment. There must be a trustworthy dispute resolution option for customers or potential customers to use. Because if you do not have something in place to provide potential purchasers with some security, the likelihood that they have faith in the e-commerce process as a whole is very, very slim. There needs to be a reassurance. And I argue that an easy way to create this reassurance is to have a reliable and trustworthy dispute resolution mechanism. Without such a mechanism, a strong e-commerce marketplace cannot thrive. The creation will be stifled and economic growth will be halted. I am not the only person to identify this, as I'm sure Mirez knows as well. I've used your work quite a lot in my PhD, and you've also identified the importance that consumer trust plays in a successful e-commerce regime. E-commerce is markedly different to our conventional brick and mortar businesses because online transactions are not limited by the same physical constraints, the same time constraints. Internet users can conclude online transactions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, across national and international borders. However, the consequences of these transactions aren't similarly instantaneous. For example, you can order something, you pay today, and then delivery takes place a few days later or next week, or if you're lucky and you've got one day rush with Amazon overnight. But there's all sorts of different steps on the process where a consumer could be vulnerable, and they need to know that they are protected at every particular stage. The difficulty with e-commerce, as I've said, is that there's no physical head office for a consumer to go to in the event of a query or in the event of a dispute. Mostly e-commerce uses a website or an app. And so there must be something extra attached to that website, something extra attached to that app that is going to actively inspire trust in your consumer, something that provides peace of mind. Consumer trust has been defined as a conviction or an anticipation that the seller or supplier can be relied upon and will not take advantage of the consumer's weakness. In real-world transactions, this trust is easily created. There is a person at the shop. There is someone who is answering the phone and you can talk to them instantaneously. Whereas if you are just working through an app, that's not always the case. And I'll talk specifically about how not having that person can be jarring to you as a consumer experiencing something that is either a complaint or a serious legal claim. A study from 2016 found that the perception of risk of e-commerce is what is negatively affecting participation in online shopping and online transactions by individuals in developing countries. And so I took an informal poll. I walked around and I asked some people on campus, asked my students, asked my colleagues, and I said, how many of you are comfortable just buying things online? And so many people said, I don't know what they're doing with my financial information. I don't know, what do I do if I ask for something and I get sent something different? And even though you think many people nowadays are used to these interactions, practically speaking, they aren't. And then that becomes even worse if you talk about someone who perhaps lives in a rural area and knows about these apps, but doesn't know how they function. And of course, there's going to then be this level of distrust. There's going to be a level of information that people are just lacking. So as I'm saying, we need a good dispute resolution process in place. We also need to aid together, I think, are integral in creating this consumer trust in e-commerce. Colleagues, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Great. Sorry, I just received a message to say my internet is a bit spotty. Where was I? Okay. So although it will take a variety of measures to create a stronger consumer trust, I don't think that it is an unfeasible possibility for the future. I think it just needs to be something that speaks to the consumers where they are, provides them reassurance that should something go wrong, there is a definitive, easy to use, and consistent measure of recourse. The recognition that consumer trust was an important factor in the success of e-commerce was first made by large-scale online marketplaces and payment processes. So think your eBays, think your PayPals, etc. And they noted that consumer attitude was a large factor in their success. I mean, in the ODR community, eBay is legendary as a company who has built in their own ODR processes, something that is reliable, something that consumers found easy to use and accessible. They created their own system of dispute resolution. They use technology to provide fast and fair resolutions to customers, providing certainty that potential disputes would not fall by the wayside. This mechanism found great success and inspired further study. it also inspired particular regional groups to develop ODR for consumers. As you know, in the EU, at the regional level, there is the specific ODR platform for consumer disputes created by the regulation on consumer ODR. Now, we can debate the merits of that regulation at a different time, and its implementation and success. We can debate that a little bit later. But I want to look at Article 1 of the EU regulation, which clearly envisions a well-functioning ODR platform that provides a high level of consumer protection, and in so doing, contributes to the proper functioning of a digital marketplace. So there you see ODR goes hand in hand with consumer protection and hand in hand with a digital marketplace. It is already envisioned, or it has already been envisioned, that ODR can have this function and can serve as quite a big way to create and cement this consumer trust. It must thus be questioned whether a similar application of ODR in the developing world would have a similar effect. Would it increase or strengthen consumer trust in various e-commerce transactions? Amy J. Schmitz is a vocal proponent of using ODR as one method of gaining or creating consumer trust, especially in the context of developing countries. She agrees that ODR would do much to provide protection for cross-border transactions, and in doing so, could help to inspire consumers who are hesitant about purchasing goods from a foreign supplier. I agree with this approach, adding the fact that if we had such an alternative dispute resolution mechanism that is easy to access, it would be a big draw card for African consumers, because access to litigation, including representation and access to courts, is already limited. Even more so when you consider that claims arising from e-commerce tend to be small value claims. So I can't speak to the rest of Africa, but in South Africa, certainly, we have a backlog in our court system, a backlog of much bigger and much more serious cases that aren't being heard. And so any kind of consumer dispute resolution would just fall by the wayside. If ODR could be adapted for primarily mobile access across Africa, that could go a long way towards providing consumers with a reliable and accessible dispute resolution option for resolving their e-commerce claims, allowing them to feel more secure when participating in these transactions. It must thus be questioned whether these measures have already been adopted by the current leaders in e-commerce in Africa. Have they incorporated this ODR into their respective websites or apps? And at least to a limited extent, I went and had a look. Countries such as Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt are constantly named as leaders in mobile internet usage and consequently as leaders in African e-commerce. I thought to look at the dispute resolution mechanisms used in the region's leading e-commerce sites to assess what our current dominant approach is and how or whether this can be improved upon. According to the 2023 stats on statista.com, the top 3 most widely used e-commerce sites are Jumia in Nigeria, Takealot in South Africa, and what used to be Souk in Egypt, but they've been subsumed under Amazon. We'll chat about that in a bit. Each of these online marketplaces primarily uses a mobile app as their main interface with their users. Speaking, of course, to the prevalence of mobile internet in Africa. Now, I must confess upfront, I have only ever ordered something from Takealot of the leaders. My sister is half Nigerian and she uses Jumia and she says it's great. But she has no idea of the dispute resolution function, just as I had no idea of the dispute resolution function with Takealot. So looking into these companies, we see that they actively promote the mobile app. This is the main way that they want to engage with their consumers. Upon closer inspection, though, it seems that each of these apps doesn't have a direct link to a dispute resolution policy or a dispute resolution function, which is very strange to me, considering that they seem to be promoting mobile use, and then that is not where their dispute resolution is housed. So I took a closer look at each of these dispute resolution policies. Jumia has a specific one. It is entitled Dispute Resolution Policy, although it is not easily located by the casual user. You start off in their marketplace, and then you are rerouted to their main website, and then you are rerouted to a menu, and then you click on a drop-down thingy, and then you click again, and then you get to another page, and there's the dispute resolution policy. It does not actually have a dispute resolution body or program or anything. It has a helpline and it has email addresses that disgruntled consumers can. That's the extent of it. There's nothing more respond. Let's look to Takealot, the South African version. And as a regular user of Takealot, I was surprised to find that their terms and conditions do not contain or refer to a specific dispute resolution policy. The only express reference to disputes is to say that they will be governed by South African law and they will be heard in the South African High Court. Now, this is nice in theory, but I tell you this for free, the South African High Court is not going to listen to these claims. The only other possibility for alternative dispute resolution is found later in the terms and conditions, where they refer the consumer to the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud, which is a very effective body, and they do in fact use online mediation. But I question whether it is sufficient for Takealot to shift the responsibility through so many channels, whether it would not be better to at least have some kind of perfunctory entry-level electronic process that we could use to resolve very easy disputes. So, like I said, it's promising that they've included this. And hopefully, they can work their way towards further development. I must say, I myself this week was a disgruntled consumer with Takealot, and I found the resolution process very difficult. I was required to send an email. The email didn't work. They told me to call the helpline. The helpline kept disconnecting. I am now out both my money and my product, and I don't know how I'm going to resolve it. So a colleague of mine said, the Lord sent you this trial so you would have a practical example for your talk. Anyway, there also seems to have been wider recognition outside of just me, outside of just my talk. There seems to have been wider recognition that the current dispute resolution mechanisms provided for in Jumia's policy and in Takealot's policy are insufficient. In Jumia's case, in February 2023, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, recommended a list of changes that the company needs to implement to provide a better consumer experience. Most important of these for our purposes is the recommendation that Jumia implements a transparent dispute resolution process that is known to consumers and users of the website. So here again, we have this idea that for consumer trust, you need a functional dispute resolution process, and your users must have knowledge. So it is that knowledge coupled with an effective dispute resolution process. Although they claim to have addressed the recommendation, what I found in my searching a week ago shows that there's still much improvement to be made. Similarly speaking, Takealot was under investigation by the South African Competition Commission. And very recently, in July, the Commission required them to introduce a 60-day dispute resolution process. To date, this has not happened, and no other guidelines were given as to what that process must comprise, but I hope, again, that they will consider an online dispute resolution process, and I'll highlight the types that I mean soon. Although there are many types of ODR that could be used, obviously, I would like to highlight two systems that I think are ideally suited to e-commerce disputes and could easily be adapted to the mobile environment. Any one of these could be a good fit for our local e-commerce sites and provides relatively simple ways for consumers to have their grievances addressed. The first method that I must mention is the use of an escrow system or something like it, where we have a third-party escrow company who is a party to your e-commerce transaction. So we have kind of an indirect ODR system where a buyer is on the one hand, a seller is on the other hand, and in the middle is this escrow company. So a buyer sees something that they wish to purchase, they pay the money, and it sits with that escrow holder, that escrow account company. They then notify the seller that the buyer has paid, and the seller sends the goods to the buyer. Only once the buyer has confirmed that they have received the goods and that they are in good order is the money released to the seller. I know that this is not a perfect solution, and I myself can think of many critiques against it, but it seems to be that is something that is going to force almost the sellers or the suppliers to up their level of customer service. It also provides the buyer with some recourse should something go wrong. There is an impartial third body who could effect a refund without anything being lost. So this is just one suggestion, but of course, there could be others. The other popular self-enforcement mechanism that I must mention here is the chargeback system. The system is controlled by a payment service provider. So again, we have a third party who is not necessarily part of the e-commerce transaction, but it allows a buyer who has authorized transactions on their credit cards to request that such a payment be reimbursed by the merchant in certain instances. So there could be a set number of instances. So for example, if there's fraudulent use of your credit card, non-delivery of goods, or delivery of defective goods, if it's one of those listed grounds, then the chargeback system allows for a consumer to request a reimbursement from the payment provider. Although this mechanism doesn't require the payment service provider to be an ODR provider, it still seems to function as an indirect way of resolving potential disputes, perhaps by avoiding them altogether. And so it could be quite effective in creating trust on the part of consumers. Again, there are critiques against the chargeback system, as it is only available to buyers who use a credit card. What about those who use debit cards or direct payments, EFTs, mobile wallets? I'm not sure. Perhaps this is just limited to credit card users, and then we could build in another mechanism for something else, but it would depend. I mean, as consumers, your consumers are not a monolith. There's always going to be differences between them. And so there should be an ODR system that is flexible enough to account for those differences. It is thus suggested that having a system like this, at least at a baseline level of ODR, could do much to appease consumers and begin to create a greater feeling of security about the e-commerce retailer. Where then does this leave us in my very broad overview of trust and e-commerce? It is clear that much more is needed from African e-commerce retailers to inspire trust in their consumers, and in so doing, ensure repeat business and continued growth. Having a reliable dispute resolution system in place creates a secure environment for consumers when using e-commerce. And attention must be paid to how best to inform the consumer of the various options available. It hasn't been done to date, and I suspect because the suppliers want to protect themselves, but a greater level of transparency would do much to reassure consumers. And I certainly would much rather patronize someone who is open about their business practices and who is consumer driven than the competition. So it could be a net positive. ODR allows for consumers to access dispute resolution mechanisms as soon as they have the complaint. And in the future, as AI continues to develop, we could have a situation where you do not need a human intermediary, which could speed up the dispute resolution process if the claim is a relatively simple one. I have only highlighted the escrow and chargeback models, and these are two of the potential system available. I do think that we need to pay a lot more attention to the relationship between reliable enforcement methods and consumer trust. This, in turn, would also serve to promote access to justice, as parties would then have another accessible dispute resolution option available to them that would succeed where traditional litigation otherwise wouldn't. I see that it is 5:42, and so I'm happy to leave it there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you so much. And many of us, I'm sure, can connect to that. Yes, I'm going to call on Grace, but there's no way we just have to have a time limit, because I know that if we had a lot more time, you will have told us so much more. I haven't done a research on this, because particularly the escrow system you mentioned, we have experienced it. I worked with Dr. Agbelusi to actually develop a system to help a company that was trying to provide that service for this, yes, to hold the money and then get confirmation. But we also knew that there could still be some disputes within that time, some that will not immediately show their faces. Then how do you resolve that? And we had to recreate some laws and find ways to make something to resolve dispute as quickly as you will expect it to be, as the parties would be interested in, both the consumer and otherwise. What we have is we still have a challenge with many people trusting ADR, talk less of even ODR.
Yes.
You find out that we too have in Nigeria, it's a federal government, Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission that we are trying to help, but they are so busy, consumed with many complaints. And what they're certainly doing is physical. Write the parties, invite them, and then, threaten to get somebody locked up and stuff like that, go to court. Whereas there are options online that could easily, and you're right. I hardly shop from Jumia. For the reasons you have mentioned, there's no transparency. So if you get it wrong, you are on your own. And I just hope that we'll accept ADR and ODR more. For instance, I'm involved in a young man trying to sign a contract. I'm not a lawyer, though. I just know about that. With somebody in Nigeria trying to sign a contract with somebody in Ghana. And the Ghanaian says that they're only comfortable with court in Ghana. And I was saying, court in Nigeria, court in Ghana. Why don't you use Mediation online. They cannot relate to mediation online. And I was trying to explain it. And what the Ghanaians told me is that, well, Ghanaian rules in litigation expects you to have tried to resolve out of court first. Now, if you can't, then you can now come to. Isn't that mediation that you're talking about? But they just cannot relate to it. So I had to just, let it be. So having said that, please let's listen to others because we don't have a lot of time. Mirez, you raise up your hand first, so please.
Thank you, Juan. I'm so saddened to hear all that from you and from Robin, because nothing has changed 3 decades after all this ODR movement has started. And Robin, thank you for this excellent summary of the entire picture that we have been facing now for the last 3 decades. And if it may reassure you, I can tell you that it's not only Africa, it's all over the world. There are only very few countries where we can rely on online courts, such as Singapore, some of the courts in the US, Lithuania and Estonia that have an excellent system. You only need to connect to the platform of the courts, use your ID card number and file a claim. So you don't even need a lawyer. I don't know how speedy is the process, but you mentioned also the backlog. It is all over the world. And consumers are denied justice, actually, as I said many times. They are denied justice and they keep being denied justice. And how can they trust any online provider, any online merchant, if they see that there is no way of getting remedy and they don't even have a contact, as you mentioned, physical contact with the merchant to go and claim anything regarding the product they purchased or the service. So my saddening is coming also from the fact that so many have tried to create online dispute resolution platforms, and so many have failed for many reasons, not because their system was not reliable, but because no support was provided by the governments. If you don't have official structures, governments supporting and publicizing this service, because you also mentioned how do you get this information to the consumers. Educating is one of the most important things, bringing the information to the users and having the support of governmental structures. And this I have noticed it from the beginning, from my very first survey in year 2000, nothing has changed. It's still the same, unfortunately. Many programs start and they stop, so lack of continuity also convinces the users that it's a science fiction and we will never get a platform to help us resolve disputes online. With the Ancestral Working Group in 2016, we started this work, and we never got to something simply because all the delegates were delegated from their countries and they came with an agenda, and we did not succeed to agree on a platform for high volume disputes, low value, across border. We only wanted to suggest something easy that anyone can access, and there was no agreement. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, we proposed some basic notes that providers and users can refer to, but this is not a solution. In Europe, you also mentioned Europe. Europe has started 2 projects in the past, which worked very well. In year 2000 also, they interrupted them, but they were working very well. Why did they stop them? And now they have this ODR Europe, but it's nonsense because all they have is a list of ADR providers, not ODR, that they can connect them to. But it's not solving the problem. It's not online. So how do we create confidence? You mentioned it yourself. There are systems. I love this. I never thought of it. And you also mentioned it, Juan, this escrow account. I think that this is just an excellent idea if you can take it forward again, because if you succeed with this, it will be a model for other countries to replicate. And again, here you need the support of the government, because if you're alone, you will have to fight with many greedy people about, no, I'm going to do this and this is going to generate revenues and so on. But it's not about generating revenues. It's about remedy and avoidance of justice. And so if we don't get to this, then where we get to with the escrow account, it can become as a sort of a trust seal when merchants subscribe to this organization providing this sort of a trust seal, which is the escrow. Then probably the users will be more confident in buying online. Now, I see that all of us do. I've been cheated also last month with a product that I bought and I claimed, and unfortunately there is no one answering, and there is no contact even on the website because it was through another vendor online. Anyway, so to make this progress, how can we do it? Unfortunately, we keep all of us fighting. I know that Robert also created a platform for mediation. Many people are trying to give means to users to make it easy. And it's just unconscionable that in 2023, we have nothing that allow us access to justice. We keep complaining about this. Everything is available online except justice. Now, in the US, some of the courts are succeeding. But I see, for instance, in France, we have started a few projects, but when you have a new government coming on board, it's not on their agenda. They just kill the project, and another one must be created again, and we get nowhere. So trust is inexistent. What can we do? Continue proposing these solutions, and I commend also Juan for this idea of escrow. Commend all those who fight to provide access to justice. Let's just continue. I mean, even if we see that things are failing, we may get somewhere provided that we persevere. So thank you very much, Robin. It was really an excellent presentation. And yeah, and yes, you spoke about terms of services and dispute resolution clauses. The two platforms you mentioned are not the only one. I just went on Amazon. I can't find it.
Yep.
And you see, I mean, all these merchants are really profiting from so many users around the world, which are all small users, and how can they, I mean, to whom can they turn? Certainly not to courts, because they will never get anywhere. So this is also really a question of perhaps boycotting the platforms that do not offer a proper service of dispute resolution. Everyone goes to Amazon. I don't. I stopped using them for years because it's just, I mean, their methods are not human. So, so we need to speak about it. We need to publish about it. We need to educate people. People don't know what to do. And we need to keep striving to get to some sort of system. So I'm happy to see that you also are trying to do things in Africa, but we need to keep uniting and keep sharing knowledge and experience and try to find solutions together. Thank you so very much, Robin.
Thank you, Mirez.
Thank you so much, Mirez. Robert mentioned, I mean, the bottom line, that things will only work better with government support. I wonder if Robert wants to say anything. That's basically the bottom line. But even then, for instance, in Nigeria, I know that government is trying hard to support, but there's just this thing about understanding what is going on that is lacking. I don't quite get it. What I think it is that, you know, this alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, communities have always adopted it and it worked. But for a place like Nigeria that went through some colonization, and then during colonization, there was a different system. That's what introduced litigation to the system. And when you introduce a uniform system like that, everybody had to comply. Well, there were still the traditional systems going on. But the thing is enforcement, because no government was going to delegate the use of force. So the minute that they all realize that they cannot enforce by the other means of dispute resolution, everybody slowly started submitting to litigation in court and have now accepted that as the only way of resolving disputes. That's even why, in many cases, people rather go to police stations to try and resolve matters than actually engage ADR, talk less of ODR, you know. So now we have a situation in Nigeria that courts are inundated with cases. Look, in any city, if there is a judge that has less than 500 cases in his docket, that's a lucky judge. So they are the ones now supporting, pushing out all these matters to ADR. So they're really trying to support, but you find out that many of them still don't understand. We tried to rewrite the law in Nigeria that we use. It was Arbitration and Conciliation Act. We tried to rewrite it and modernize it. It took so many years, but thankfully it took, because our legislators simply didn't quite relate to what we were doing. In fact, they started suggesting things that were alternative dispute resolution. Government trying to support and then offering all sorts of assistance that now makes it a government issue. A government. So we had to keep saying, no, that's not what we're saying. It's not going to work that way. So now, we have finally had the Arbitration and Mediation Act signed, thankfully, but it took so long, And I think as we go on and make people understand that this is a way to resolve problems, then we will do better. I think we still just need to educate. Robert just sent in something. Robert, let me just to mention the size of the problem. This past year, eBay had 60 million online disputes. 60 million, 1 year. Wow. And how did they resolve?
Well,
do you have any more information?
They do have an online dispute system that's pretty actively used, but yeah, this has been a problem for a long time. This is, and it's not just developing countries. I mean, part of the issue in developing countries, I think, is there's not a large distribution of credit cards, and also maybe logistics for delivery aren't maybe up to par as well. So between those things and, not major third-party payers, it creates a bigger problem in developing countries. But in general, it's a major problem as more and more, I think it's Forbes estimates $1.1 trillion this year in online sales. So in general, worldwide. So you can imagine how many disputes you're going to wind up with. It's a large number. So,
well, thank you for part of what we will have to learn. What I recommend we learn is to use Robert's software, because it can solve this problem like that if we make use of it. But we have to learn it first and then teach people. Yes.
Yeah, well, the software is really geared towards more complicated disputes.
Yes, I noticed.
Not for financial transactions.
I noticed.
If, wrongful death is a lot harder than you didn't deliver what I ordered. So this is a different kind of dispute. So.
Yeah, but we always have to tinker with things to make things easier, because when this company that wanted to introduce escrow system came to us, we had to sit down and look at it. That look, we do mediation, yes, we do arbitration, but then can this happen at the speed that the customers require? So we had to sit down and recreate something for that purpose. So, Robert, when there's a market for you to tinker with your software, we will tell you about it and we'll make demands from you. Does anybody have anything else to add? We are 1 hour, 1 minute.
Just a comment too, and I think that the eBay process is a great model, except that you need other investors to agree to replicate a similar system, because it's so easy to use for small disputes, which are typical and which can be straightforward resolved.
Yes, I don't think anything complicated is needed, because if the product is faulty and it's a factory fault, there's nothing. But we have this tendency not to be totally honest all the time, and we don't want to take for a place in Nigeria, if you are dealing in imported goods, I can imagine if it's just a printer, a small DeskJet printer that you find has a factory fault, yes, it's going to be replaced, but you have to get it back to US or something. I guess that's why people will run away from wanting to, to refund whoever has paid for it. I guess these are the problems we face here. Because if you can easily return these things, the producers might be able to take it. I've had a friend return an iPhone. In fact, she didn't think that she could, but she just happened to pass by the shop and grumbled by one iPhone shop and grumbled aloud. And they called her in and kept her quiet, asked her what happened, and quickly gave her a newer version of the phone, because they wanted to maintain that reputation and that trust that Robin was talking about.
That's precisely the comment that I forgot to mention very quickly. If the providers, such as at the beginning, it was the case with some providers, when solving disputes, they would publish online how the disputes were solved, how many were solved, and how many were not solved. And this, I think, the statistical reports, annual statistics reports provided by merchants on their platform can also create trust. And so, as you said, they wanted to make their reputation. It's a question of reputation. So this is where we can get them also to be more serious about the complaints. So we still have a lot to do.
Yes. Well, Robin, thanks so much. But this is an ongoing topic because it's an emerging aspect of dispute resolution. And so we will definitely be a few steps behind you all the time, particularly because we know that you are researching on it. And then, of course, you will have a lot more information than we do. So whenever we need to share more knowledge, we're always going to be eyeing your direction. And please, watch where you go. Don't go to lowlands in case there are going to be rains. We will have to. We
have to move up Table Mountain.
Yeah, we're going to mount a calendar and then weather report and then put your name there. Robin, we don't want her going to anywhere below a certain altitude, above sea level. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you. I thank you so much for coming. And in any case, I won't be able to thank you as well as Mirez does, because I've noticed that she's one of the best you can have to say the proper thank you before we close. Mirez, help us out again.
John, it's always an honor for me to be invited by you to say a few last remarks. As I mentioned at the beginning, I appreciate a lot the clear and complete summary that Robin has provided us. These knowledge sharing sessions are extremely important because every time I connect, I learn something new. And we all learn from each other. We need to keep connecting as a community supporting each other and keep learning from each other, because it's a recent, actually, it's a recent field that we still build on, seeing that unfortunately others don't believe in what we are creating, which is of the utmost importance. So thank you very much, Robin. It has been a real pleasure listening to you. And as Juan said, please keep on your research and keep sharing with us. I would appreciate also hearing more from you. So Juan, Robin, thank you so much, and looking forward for the next session.
Thank you
Bless
so
you,
much, everyone.
Robin.
And I just want to say thank you for having me to speak, especially in front of Mirez. I was a little bit nervous because I've been following your work for so long. And it's just great to share my passion subject with all of you. So thank you very much.
I'm learning it. I didn't know that you did so, and
Well,
I'm happy that that helped in a way. But I'm always happy to support also.
Yay!
I'm not. Yeah.
let me share a secret about Mirez. I'm always so happy when I see her because she's not going to miss anything, you know, and she's going to point out every detail. So whenever we're doing some work, we need to run it by her, you know, to make sure that it's fine before we send it out. She's going to notice every dot, every comma, everything. So
But I'm not.
it's always good to have her around.
But this is the passion I have about this field,
Yes.
and Robert also will agree that we share this passion. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it, because we get no revenue, we get no glory from it. It's just the passion of giving access to justice, or trying to give access to justice. And I'm not bad. I only want to support and to help people get further on this line. So thank you again so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Mr. Patoko, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Great
Deji.
one. Great one.
Halima,
Great.
to see you. Samuel, Mrs. Josephine Bode, thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much. Marichela, thank you. Francis Unali, thank you. Oh, by Francis Unali, yes. Thank you. Good to see you. Yeah. All
Bye,
right.
everyone. Bye, everyone. I'll see you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yes. Samuel. Oh, the young man. Say hi. Hi.
Sayang with an dear enthusiast.
Hi, how are you? Yes. Mrs. Thomas, thank you. Daniel Ndogo, thank you. So we are the hosts. We are going to be the one to leave last. So I'm not going to leave, shut down on anybody. Wow.